Now, there's growing evidence that Russian soldiers are using rape as a weapon of war in Ukraine. In areas retaken from Russian troops, civilians are giving horrifying accounts of sexual violence. Ukraine's human rights ombudsman has received hundreds of reports, but the true numbers are impossible to calculate. DW's Rebecca Ritters went to Bucha on the outskirts of Kyiv, a place already notorious for Russian soldiers killing civilians. She heard the story of one young woman whose parents still don't know exactly what happened to her. A warning our viewers may find this report distressing.
This is Karina Yashova. She was about to turn 23 when Russian soldiers marched into her town, Bucha, on the outskirts of Kyiv. Karina had plans. She was managing the local sushi bar, but was saving money to study at university. This is the last place we're sure Karina was seen alive, the stairs outside her flat. It was March 10th. After this, everything becomes unclear. This is where one man thinks he saw Russian soldiers kill her, but he can't be sure if the woman was Karina or someone else.
He put her here, like this. Her head was bent back. Then he took her in his arms and carried her over there. Then another soldier shot her.
This is where police told Karina's parents they found the body. They said it looked like she'd been raped.
The police said that she was badly tortured.
They shot her in the legs.
My girl wanted to live so much. She even applied tourniquets to herself to stop the bleeding.
Then, with a shot in the head, they killed her.
Forensic scientists examining the hundreds of bodies the Russians left behind say many of the women have been raped. Organisations across the country support those who survive.
Of the 12 cases we are working on, 11 are cases of gang rape. In all of these cases, women reported that the occupiers were drunk or had taken drugs. In all 12 cases, it was unprotected intercourse, which means a huge risk of unwanted pregnancy and disease.
Ukraine's Commissioner for Human Rights tells me the sheer number of calls makes them think Russians are using rape as a weapon.
When a Russian soldier rapes a Ukrainian woman, a girl, a boy, an elderly woman, they keep saying things like, "This will happen to every Nazi whore," or "We will rape until you can't give birth to Ukrainians." These are signs of genocide of the Ukrainian people.
For Karina's parents, the only certainty they have is their loss and their fury.
We hate the Russians. I'm ashamed to speak Russian. I will learn Ukrainian.
They buried Karina here in Biletsyrka near the morgue, 2 weeks after her 23rd birthday.
And joining me now is DW's Rebecca Ritters, who filed that report from Ukraine. Rebecca, welcome. You've just spent the last month in Ukraine. Can you tell us more about the evidence that you heard that suggests Russian soldiers are using rape as a weapon of war?
Well, as the Human Rights Ombudswoman said in the report, they see the numbers of the testimonies coming in, or of the calls that they're receiving, and they're extrapolating, and they're saying that, you know, obviously this is systematic by those numbers and not just kind of one-off cases. You know, as you mentioned in the lead into that report, it's really difficult to get numbers, and they're of course expecting them to grow. But one official number we've heard from the Ombudswoman's office is 400 calls in the first 2 weeks of April, but they are expecting that number to grow. They're primarily from the regions around Kyiv, the capital, as that was liberated in April. And, you know, when you look at places like Mariupol, they're expecting to see a lot more cases in other parts of the country, particularly in those regions, you know, in the time to come. So I think the number really speaks to it being used systematically.
So potentially the tip of the iceberg. Is there anything being done to protect women from this?
It's really difficult to protect women against these crimes, clearly. But some organisations I've spoken to are providing emergency contraception for people in conflict areas or people that are in newly liberated areas. I know that one Norwegian organisation that I spoke to, for instance, was going into those areas around Kyiv and delivering emergency contraception. There's a little bit of a taboo around that topic in Ukraine, so it does make it difficult, but that was happening so that women can try and prevent pregnancies from the rape. But from the act itself, very difficult to prevent.
Can you tell us what's being done in Ukraine to document what is actually happening to these victims of rape?
There are call centres for this particular crime that's set up by the Human Rights Ombudsman, and organisations that are helping, like the one I spoke to, Lustrada, and others like it, are then funneling information to the Human Rights Office and to the prosecutor. The prosecutor has around 8,000 investigators, and they're going into these areas and talking to people and trying to document all the war crimes. They've documented more than 8,000 cases of war crimes, of which, several hundred of rape. In terms of turning these particular crimes into testimony, legal testimony can be quite difficult because a lot of the people are calling for psychological help, and many of them, due to taboo around this and due to the traumatic situation of these crimes, don't necessarily even want to leave their names or where they were. So it can be difficult, the Ombudswoman was telling me, to then transfer them to testimony, but they are documenting as much as they can, and they swear that they're going to be bringing this to justice.
Now, rape in war zones often does go undocumented. How likely is it that Russian soldiers who are guilty of rape will be brought to justice?
Well, yeah, very difficult, Anya, as you say. This has been going on in Russia during the Donbass conflict. So for 8 years, they've been documenting these cases. It's very difficult to bring them to justice as well. The prosecutor, is very adamant that they are going to ensure that these cases be brought to justice. They're setting up like a war crimes tribunal similar to the ones post-Rwanda and post-Bosnia, and they hope that they will be able to, bring from the highest levels down. I mean, people wanting to even bring, make sure that President Putin pays for these crimes. But as the ICC, Russia is not signed up to the ICC, as we know. So it will be difficult, but, even President Zelensky himself saying he's determined to make sure that people get tried for these crimes.
DW's Rebecca Ritters, thank you.
Katerina Busol is a Ukrainian lawyer specializing in international humanitarian and criminal law, and she joins us now from London. Thanks for being with us. Katerina, how likely is it that the perpetrators of rape in the Ukraine war will ever be brought to justice?
Good afternoon. And I must say that the attention of the international community and actually of domestic investigators and prosecutors in Ukraine towards sexual violence has been unprecedented since February 2022. But it's important to stress that, of course, Russia's aggression towards Ukraine started much earlier in 2014. And during that period, although there were quite numerous reports about rapes and other forms of sexual violence, such as sexualized torture or threats of rapes to a survivor or to his or her family member, there were not enough domestic prosecutions. There was only one communication to the International Criminal Court prepared, and there were no, so far as we know, prosecutions at the domestic levels in other countries, in foreign state, under the principle of universal jurisdiction. Now, with these new accounts, horrific accounts of rape and other forms of sexual violence, post-February 2022, we see that this particular alleged war crime, potentially a crime against humanity, and a potential crime of genocide, as mentioned by Ombudswoman Denisova, receives far more attention. So at this point, it's crucial to harmonize all the documentation efforts to ensure that they're sensitized and that they don't re-traumatize the survivors, because there's already a problem that several survivors are being interviewed by human rights lawyers, investigators and prosecutors for several times, which of course cause the additional trauma for them. And then, of course, to see how these cases proceed, not only to the Ukrainian courts, and the prosecutor general seems to pay particular attention to sexual violence now, but also to foreign jurisdictions where many survivors end up as refugees, and also to the International Criminal Court.
Gathering testimony and evidence in such sensitive cases is difficult. What do you see as the main challenges in bringing these cases to prosecution?
As I mentioned, there are two challenges: to harmonize the documentation efforts at first, because so many actors are involved now in the conflict that has been ongoing for 8 years, but the activation of efforts, domestic and especially international, has happened only post-February 2022. So there should be more of coordination between the numerous human rights NGOs, documentation initiatives, their harmonization of their efforts with those of Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors. And of course, also there should be more alignment in terms of what focus will the foreign teams that consult Ukrainian Office of the Prosecutor General and the investigative team of the ICC, what they will have. And this is important to ensure, in particular, with such sensitive group of survivors as survivors of sexual violence. And pre-February this year, Ukraine, to my knowledge and to what I have seen in my legal practice, there have not been children assaulted before February this year. So there should be a particular attention as to how to document this evidence, not only harmoniously, but also in terms of sensitivity and respect for survivors.
Now, you've said in the past that there's been a tendency to over-focus on rape as a weapon of war. What do you mean by that?
In the context of Ukraine, unfortunately, to the contrary, the UN made a conclusion in 2017 that rape and sexual violence were not used as a weapon of war. However, the human rights organizations, for instance, the East Ukrainian Center for Civic Initiatives, that has worked consistently with survivors of sexual violence in the Russia-Ukraine armed conflict since 2014, have claimed that they did see the targeted use of sexual violence through, as I mentioned, not only rape, but sexualized torture, the threats of torture and mutilation to a detained person or his or her relatives. So this tendency has been there, perpetrated by Russians in Ukraine since the early years of the conflict. What we are noticing now, though, is the new scale of this violence, it's spreading to children and to the elderly people, and also this very disturbing rhetoric that could ring a bell about a possible genocidal intent. And in the report, you provided the quotations from Ombudswoman Denisova, who said that rape survivors post-February this year in Ukraine claimed that the Russians accompanied rape with the words that it was perpetrated for women not to want to have sex with Ukrainian men and not to give birth to these so-called Nazi children, or that the women should learn the lesson and that would be perpetrated towards every alleged Nazi whore. So this sends a very strong, suppressive, threatening message to a woman or a man who is being assaulted, to their family members, because there are also allegations of rapes in front of family members. And the larger message to the society about this subjugation through the assault on a very intimate sphere of every human being, their sexual sphere.
Katerina, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Katerina Busol, a Ukrainian lawyer in London specializing in international law.
Thank you.